Spellcrafting has finally come to ESO in the form of Scribing. Not quite the same thing, but close enough. And while the new system and spells are useful to all players, they're especially great for healers, with a lot of ways to make our group stronger and fill out gaps in the comp. This is Maya from Ninja Pools, and here's my advice on how to approach Scribing as a healer, which scripts to look out for, and some ideas for the best combos to use in dungeons and trials. First, let's eliminate the stuff we're not going to use. With 4,000 combos, we need to trim the fat. Healers almost always run destruction and healing staves, and that isn't changing, so we can ditch the other weapon types. Not saying you can't use them, I'm just giving you a logical place to start. Same with the scripts. Things like bleed damage or taunt are not a great fit with the healer's setup and function. Others like defile or trauma are for PvP. And some aren't even available unless we change weapons, so we'll skip those. The list is still huge, but don't worry, not all these components can be combined, so the list of options is a lot smaller than it looks. Very quickly, let's go through what's left, starting with the Grimoires. Elemental Explosion can only be used with a Destruction Staff equipped. It's a damage skill, but it can apply buffs and debuffs in an AoE, some of which were tricky or impossible to do before. Mender's Bond can only be used with a Restoration Staff. It's a 12-second tether, which connects to an ally, probably the tank, granting buffs to them and sometimes to allies in between. Those are the weapon grimoires. Next, Soul Magic. Wield Soul is the first grimoire we unlock in the intro quest and pretty versatile. Offensive, defensive, it can do a lot. But it's single target only. The AoE version, Soul Burst, creates an AoE around you and can do some very cool stuff, but it's also the last grimoire you unlock. You need to do the entire Scribing story on at least one character to get it. These two Soul Magic Grimoires are also the only ones that can use Anchorite's Potency, a unique script that's very interesting to healers. Well, we'll come back to that later. Torchbearer is Fighter's Guild, a channel where you buff your group or damage enemies by waving a torch at them. Allsteel's Contingency is Mage's Guild, and is like a pre-buff that doesn't activate until you cast another ability, so it's great for short bursts like Trash Pulls. It's also the only grimoire which can use the Growing Impact script, which is very useful for supports and which we'll also come back to later. Finally, Trample is the Assault grimoire. To be honest, in PvE, it's not that useful, but it's so fun that I didn't want to skip it. It sends your mount charging out and leaving behind an AoE corridor which can apply certain effects. It's worth saying that all these grimoires interact with skill line passives. For example, slotting Contingency increases your max Magicka, Torchbearer increases your weapon and spell damage, Trample will trigger Powerful Assault, and so on. Now onto scripts, and let's go a bit faster. Focus scripts determine what a skill does at a basic level, like damage, healing, CC. Damage Shield does what it says. Dispel removes enemy AoEs and shields. Generate Ultimate is obvious, so are Healing and Immobilize, although the Immobilize script can also grant Snare immunity. Mitigation reduces incoming damage, Restore Resources is pretty clear. Once again, just because something is grayed out here doesn't mean you can't use it. It just means it's not the main thing we're looking for as healers. For example, we often need to select a damage type, and I might grab Shock Damage for more Concussed, more of Balance, and hopefully some minor vulnerability as well. But I'm just using it as the vehicle for whatever I'm trying to do. It's not the main thing about the skill. Signature scripts add a bonus effect to the ability. Anchorite's Potency consumes soul gems to generate ultimate either for you or your group. Assassin's Misery applies 3 status effects depending on the grimoire. Class Mastery is a big topic, and I want to deal with that in a separate video. It changes from class to class and is not always that useful for healers, but one of the most important things about being a good support is flexibility, switching from offensive to defensive, doing whatever's most valuable in that moment, and Class Mastery can be pretty strong if used correctly. Crusader's Defiance can remove negative effects or grant immunity to them. Druid's Resurgence restores resources. Gladiator's Tenacity reduces damage taken. Growing Impact applies affix scripts in an AoE, which can be really valuable. Knight's Valor gives your allies more block mitigation and lower block cost. Sage's Remedy is a heal over time. Thief's Swiftness improves mobility. War Mage's Defense is a damage shield. Finally, affix scripts add buffs and debuffs to the ability, and for us, that's often the crucial part. But since these terms are already known in the game, there's no point going through and explaining them. And they're all the minor versions. Brutality, Sorcery, Savagery, and Prophecy are the only major buffs I can think of that you can get from Scribing. And if you're wondering why Berserk isn't included, it's just because it can't be combined with any of the grimoires on our list. That's a good call by Zos, since every healer already has access to Minor Berserk through Combat Prayer, one of our core abilities. So it'd be kind of a waste to include Berserk when there are other buffs we're more interested in. The closer you look at Scribing and the various combos, the more you'll notice stuff like this. It really looks like they've tried to give us things that aren't crazy strong, but the subtle power-ups that we don't already have access to. I highly encourage you to play around with the system. Even if you don't have the scripts yet, you can uncheck the usable box and just browse the different combos and see how each script changes depending on what you combine it with. Also, you're the one who knows your group, what it has and what it doesn't have. That's the best place to start. Here are some examples which should be pretty broadly applicable. I want to stress that these are just my ideas intended to highlight how the system works and how healers can use it to add power to the group. But if a particular effect is already taken care of, the example I'm offering might be completely useless, so be smart. Now, there's not a lot of actual healing in these combos, but there are several good reasons for that. 1. We don't need more heals. A couple of HODs and Combat Prayer is usually all you need. Something like 90% of our heals are over heals anyway. 2. Healing is just one of our jobs. When things go wrong, or we're in the middle of a nasty survivability check, sure, we ditch everything and just spam heals. But most of the time, we should be multitasking. 3. Scribing doesn't actually have that many healing options. Anyway, in vague order of usefulness, we start with Elemental Explosion. I want to apply off balance reliably in an AoE. Useful in multi-target boss fights, but I'm thinking mainly about trash pulls in dungeons and trials. DDs like to run Exploiter for 10% extra damage against off-balance enemies. And in trash, where DDs often reach 200-300k DPS, that 10% can make a big difference. Especially since off-balance lasts 7 seconds, and most trash pulls don't last longer than that anyway. I picked Assassin's Misery for the triple status effect, and because Elemental Explosion costs Magicka, it will apply Burning, Chill, and Concussion. We don't care about Burning, that's just damage, but Concussion applies Minor Vulnerability, another debuff which is tricky to apply in an AoE, and which increases damage taken by another 5%. The AoE is also massive, a 10-meter radius, so the stack doesn't even have to be that tight for this to work. Also, if we're running an Ice Staff, applying Guaranteed Chill will place Minor Brittle on the entire stack, increasing critical damage taken by 10%. You could easily be adding 100k DPS to your group in Dungeon Trash. Not bad for a single cast. Pick whichever focus you want. Dispelling enemy AoEs could be nice if the pull goes on for a while. Stun could be very handy if your tank is okay with it. But you can just go with damage. I chose Magic Damage because it can apply Overcharged, which means Magicka Steel for any Magicka DDs in your group. It's not much, but every little helps. Again, these are just examples. The obvious caveats with this one are that it's expensive, doesn't last long, and becomes less valuable if any of these debuffs are already present. Talk to your tanks. Next, a similar example of what Contingency can do. The one you cast on yourself as a pre-buff and then trigger with your next cast. I might use this alongside the Elemental Explosion we just made, to apply Minor Breach in an AoE. Again, it's an important debuff that's tricky to apply in an area, unless sundered uptimes are super high. Like for example, if multiple Stam DDs are spamming Carve and Whirling Blades, but if you're working with a bunch of Arcanists and Mag DKs, probably not. Technically, we may already have Minor Breach via Brittle from the previous ability, but only if enemies are standing in Wall of Frost, and only for 4 seconds. This version lasts 22 seconds, which makes it useful in almost any multi-target fight and not just trash pulls. The key here is the signature script Growing Impact, which takes whatever affix script we choose and applies it in an AoE. So far, this script only works with Ulfsild's Contingency, and we can use it to easily provide Breach, intellect and endurance, protection, or vulnerability. Those are typically going to bring the most benefit. Force and resolve should already be present. As for the focus, any of these should work. It depends what you need. For trash fights, I thought it'd be cool to pop a shield on everyone at the start while the tank is still getting everything taunted. Next up, Torchbearer. This time, I went less for utility and more for luxury. We can use the Generate Ultimate Focus and the Minor Heroism affix to get everyone's ults back faster and bring our big burst phases closer together. This will really speed things up and is a great match with things like Pearls of Elnefey, Pillager's Prophet, Master Architect for dungeons, and so on. This is a 2-second channel and costs a lot of stamina, so you can't exactly spam it, but that's fine. Every 20 seconds for the heroism, and then now and again when you've got a couple of moments and stamina to spare. If you're in a fight where channeling is dangerous, you can cancel the cast early. Every sweep of the torch refreshes the effect, so it's never wasted. Or you could use a version with a healing focus and Gladiator's Tenacity signature for tricky fights. Then you'll be healing yourself and your group while channeling, and also reducing all damage taken by 30% for 2.2 seconds. That is a crazy amount of mitigation, and it only works with Torchbearer. If you combine Gladiator's Tenacity with Contingency, it only grants 8% reduction, so this is worth knowing about for fights where you know heavy damage isn't coming, and you can do a lot to soften it. But like I said, this is a luxury. There shouldn't be any fight where your tank needs an extra 30% mitigation, and there are some other juicy options for the signature. Altigen is the same, nobody strictly needs Minor Heroism, but if you can fit it into your setup and use it effectively, this will be one of the more power creepy scribed abilities in PvE. I'm definitely going to use it in Trash Balls, since you do have to be in combat for it to work, and Heroism seems to get removed the instant the fight ends. You can do a similar Altigen thing with Soul Burst and the Anchorite's Potency script, which we talked about earlier. This consumes a Soul Gem to give ultimate to you and your group, but it only works this way if you choose the healing focus. If you choose Shield instead, the ult goes to you or an ally. And if you choose damage, the ult goes to you and no one else. Now, it's not a ton of ult, it does have a 5-second cooldown, and it will be very expensive to spam in terms of both Magicka and Soul Gems. But again, you don't have to spam it to make a difference. It's not a bad little burst heal either. And any of the 4 affix scripts could work. If your dungeon group doesn't have an Arcanist, then Minor Courage is the way to go. But I can see any of them being useful. It's worth mentioning that you can also use the healing focus to apply other signature scripts to the group, such as removing negative effects with Crusader's Defiance, or placing a sticky hot on everyone with Sage's Remedy. Next up, Mender's Bond, the Tether. You can do quite a lot with this, but I thought I'd highlight another mitigation effect. This is the signature script Knights of Valor, which increases block mitigation and reduces block cost by 8% while the tether is active. Again, if a tank relies on this to survive, then something's up. But there are plenty of times when a tank will really appreciate this, plus it also applies to other group members touching the tether. Since we're looking at a survivability option, I added the Damage Shield Focus script and the Minor Vitality Affix script. If your group is struggling, this is a pretty solid little care package. The shield isn't that big, but it refreshes every second, and Minor Vitality is great if you don't already have it from Ozazan and your tank isn't a DK. By the way, Vitality and a couple of others I've mentioned are scripts you can easily get for free. We just released a video on this, so go watch that next. It only takes 10-15 minutes to collect them all. And again, this is just one route you could take with Mender's Bond. You could swap Vitality for Heroism, Courage, Intellect and Endurance, or you could apply Minor Brittle to enemies in the Tether. Some interesting alternatives with Focus and Signature scripts as well. The Tether stretches to 20 meters before it snaps. And it's not a channel, so you can just continue with your regular casts for those 12 seconds, then recast it if necessary. With Wield Soul, I went for a niche example. I grabbed Anchorite's Potency again because Altigen on supports is so important. But Wield Soul is a single target ability, not great for buffing the group, so I went with the Empower affix for 70% more heavy attack damage if you're on Rojo duty. Might as well make those heavy attacks hit hard, right? Healer DPS is definitely not a priority, and you may already have Empower from Molten Armaments, but DK isn't the only tank class out there, especially at the moment, so this might be worth considering. Boosting your ult gain outside of the other healer's pillager procs is definitely of value. Even one extra horn during the fight can make a big difference. And since the affix is only going to hit one target, I thought Empower was an interesting option. Now, for this to work, you must choose a damage focus. That way the Ultigen and Empower can only go to you. If you select Heal or Shield, these effects could go to anyone. Always check that second line in the focus part of the tooltip where it says Beneficial Signature and Affix Scripts only apply to you. Lastly, Trample is mostly a bit of fun and not that useful, but it does look amazing, and it still cracks me up sending my mount charging into enemies, especially since it uses your currently equipped mount, so if you have a toy mount, you can create havoc with a little stick horse. Tell me that isn't hilarious. Anyway, to make the ability somewhat useful, the signature has got to be Assassin's Misery for status effects, Class Mastery or Thief Swiftness for speed. This is not a named speed buff, so it should stack with Expedition. In fact, Minor Expedition is one of the affix options here, but go with whatever you need. Vulnerability could be good, Mangle and Trash, Off Balance. The focus script actually determines which resource the ability will cost, which is pretty handy. That's 7 out of 7. As I said at the start, there's no rule which says healers can't use other weapons. It's just that you need a pretty good reason to ditch the standard setup, and one scribed ability probably isn't enough. But as you can see, there are plenty of options for us already, and some of them are really strong. I hope my thoughts on this were helpful to you. Join our Discord and let us know which combos you're using. If ever there was a time to get creative with your setup, this is it. There's always something the group needs. We just gotta find it. Please remember to support the channel if you like what we do here. Khan has been making some amazing content recently, including a big video on the scribing farm and how to obtain all the scripts. Check out all of that if you haven't already. Like, subscribe, and please share. Thank you so much, guys. Have an amazing time with the new chapter, and I'll see you soon.